It started small, the way things that change everything usually do. A second plate on the counter. A portion of pasta that was clearly more than one person's portion. A bowl of soup left covered on the stove with a note that said "in case you're hungry" in her handwriting, which I recognized the way you recognize all handwriting that has accumulated in your life. Labels on leftovers, reminders on the whiteboard, the grocery list she sometimes left on the kitchen table with a small arrow at the bottom pointing to your stuff and my stuff organized in two neat columns. I didn't think much of it the first week. I thought she was stress cooking. She did that sometimes. When a work deadline was close or something was bothering her, she processed it through the kitchen, made elaborate things for no particular occasion, then left them on the counter like she'd forgotten they were there. By week 3, I noticed it wasn't stress cooking. It was intentional. Every night. Enough for 2. When I finally asked her about it, she was at the stove, and she went very still, and she did not turn around. My name is Eli Morrow. I was 30. An urban planner for a mid-sized city planning department in Minneapolis, the person responsible for thinking, in formal and technical terms, about how people moved through space. Sidewalks, transit corridors, the zoning decisions that determined whether a block felt like somewhere you wanted to be or somewhere you passed through as quickly as possible. My job was designing the conditions for human connection. I had not, until the autumn in question, noticed the irony. I had been living in the apartment on Lyndale for 2 years, the second of which was shared. My previous roommate had taken a job in Portland and given 2 months' notice, and I had put up a listing in early September. The apartment was a good one, 3rd floor, corner unit, 2 bedrooms with actual walls rather than curtains, the kind of place that justified the cost by making you feel like an adult person, rather than someone approximating adult life in a temporary space. I had screened 3 people. The first 2 were fine. The third was Margot. She was 31, a research coordinator at the university's public health department, a methodical, steady person who organized data for a living and had opinions about everything she'd organized data about, which was most things related to how people got sick and how systems either helped or failed them. She had references that were thoughtful rather than just complimentary. She had asked, during the showing, whether the radiators were the old cast iron kind or the newer baseboard kind, which told me she had been in enough Minneapolis winters to know the question mattered. She moved in on a Saturday with fewer boxes than I expected, and a kitchen equipment collection that made my kitchen equipment collection feel like a rough draft. I want to be clear about what living with Margot was like before the cooking for 2 period, so the cooking for 2 period makes the right kind of sense. It was easy. This sounds unremarkable, and it wasn't. I had lived with 3 people before Margot, in college, in graduate school, in the brief and ill-advised period in my late 20s when I had tried to save on rent by sharing a place with someone I met at a housewarming party. And what I had learned from all 3 was that sharing space was, at bottom, a sustained negotiation between 2 people's habits, preferences, and tolerances. Some people were good at it, some people were not. Margot was good at it the way she was good at her job, not through effort, but through a natural legibility about what she needed and what she didn't. She said when something bothered her before it accumulated into something larger. She did not perform ease she wasn't feeling. She was quiet in the evenings in a way that was genuine rather than strategic, and she used the common spaces as though they were genuinely common, which is rarer than it should be. What I had not accounted for, when I selected a roommate on the basis of compatibility and reasonable references, was that compatibility was not a stable category. It could become something else without announcing itself. She came home from the farmer's market the second Saturday of October with a cloth bag full of vegetables she then spent 40 minutes turning into something that made the entire apartment smell like brown butter and roasted garlic and late autumn and every good thing. She left a portion on the counter with a note and took hers to her room, and I ate mine at the kitchen table at 9:30 and thought, honestly, that it was one of the better things I had eaten in recent memory. I told her so in the morning. She said, over her coffee, not looking up from her laptop, "The squash was good this week." "Whatever you did to it was good," I said. "Miso," she said. "And a little maple." "I would not have thought to do that," I said. "Most people wouldn't," she said, still not looking up, and there was nothing in her voice that I could point to, and yet. She cooked the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that, and then without ceremony or announcement it became most evenings. Not elaborate things, sometimes just pasta with a good sauce, sometimes soup, once a dal that she made in the afternoon and left simmering low, so the apartment smelled like cardamom and ginger from 3 o'clock onward. Whatever it was, there were always 2 portions. Always enough. I ate what she left and said thank you, and she said it was nothing. She was cooking anyway. I did the dishes when I got to them first. I started picking up the groceries she texted me about when I was closer to the store. A small and unannounced reciprocity developed, the kind that builds between people who share space long enough that consideration starts to run in both directions without requiring discussion. But the cooking was always hers, and the portions were always 2. I noticed, quietly, that I had started timing my evenings around it. Not dramatically, not rearranging plans, just developing a slight preference for being home at the time she cooked, for the specific combination of the apartment smelling like something, and her being in the kitchen, and the low particular quiet of a weeknight that had become, without my choosing it, the part of the day I most reliably looked forward to. I noticed this the way I noticed things about the city I worked on, as data, information about how a space was actually being used as distinct from how it had been designed to be used. I did not yet know what to do with the data. She was from Madison originally, had that specific quality of Midwest sincerity that people from outside the region sometimes mistook for simplicity, and people from inside the region understood to be its own form of rigor. She had come to Minneapolis for graduate school and stayed for work, and had been here 6 years, long enough to have opinions about the neighborhoods and where the city was going that she expressed with the quiet authority of someone who had thought about something longer than most people. She told me about her work in pieces, the way people tell you about work they care about, not in summaries but in specific moments, the data point that surprised everyone, the study that took 2 years to design and 4 months to conduct, and produced an answer nobody wanted. She was not cynical about the gap between what research found and what policy did. She was clear-eyed about it, which was different. Once, over dishes, we had started doing dishes together in October. Another thing that had happened without being decided. She told me about a study she'd helped coordinate on social isolation in urban populations. The finding that had stuck with her was not what she'd expected. It wasn't that isolated people lacked access to public space. It was that they lacked what she called ambient belonging, the low-level continuous awareness of other people that made a person feel tethered to the world without requiring them to perform connection. The coffee shop effect, I said. She looked at me. You know it? It's why I do the work I do, I said. Why sidewalk design matters. Why benches face each other rather than the street, in well-designed plazas. You can be alone without being isolated if the space is built right. She was looking at me with a focused attention that I had noticed before and not known what to call. Exactly, she said. Quietly. We finished the dishes in a silence that had something running under it. November, 3rd week. A Tuesday. I came home late, a site meeting that went long, traffic on Hennepin, the particular grinding end of a day that leaves you wanting dinner and quiet above most things. I came through the door at 8:15 to the smell of something good from the kitchen, which had happened often enough that my shoulders came down before I'd hung up my coat. She was at the stove. Soup, from the look of it, something with tomato and herbs and the particular depth that comes from something having simmered long enough that the apartment had been holding the smell all afternoon. I set my bag down and said, "Hi," and she said, "Hi," without turning around, which was not unusual. She often didn't turn when her hands were busy. I poured a glass of water, stood at the counter, and looked at the 2 bowls she had already set out. 2 bowls, 2 spoons, 2 placemats on the kitchen table. Not on the counter, on the table. Set. Something about the setting of it, the deliberateness, the 2 placemats lined up, landed differently than the covered portions on the counter had landed. "Margot," I said. She said, stirring. "You've been cooking for 2, I said. The stirring stopped. She didn't turn around. "I cook a lot," she said, carefully, to the stove. "Every night," I said. "For about 3 weeks." She said nothing. 2 bowls, I said. 2 placemats. The kitchen was very quiet. The soup moved slightly in the pot, a small sound. "Margot," I said gently. "Why?" She was very still for a long moment. Her hands were on the counter on either side of the stove. I could see the line of her shoulders and the way they had the particular set of someone preparing for something. She said quietly to the pot, "Because I like knowing you're going to eat." The kitchen held the sentence. "And because—" She stopped. "And because," I said softly. "And because it's the closest I could get," she said, "to saying something I didn't know how to say." There it was. She still hadn't turned around. I crossed the kitchen. I came and stood beside her at the stove, not behind her, beside her, close enough to see her face in profile. She was looking at the soup and her jaw was set in the particular way of someone being precise about their composure. "Margot," I said. "I know," she said. "I know it's—" "Look at me," I said. She turned. Her eyes were bright and still, and she had the expression of someone who has said a true thing and is now in the interval between the saying and the knowing what happens next. I looked at her for a moment, at the person who had spent 3 weeks leaving soup on the stove and portions on the counter and 2 placemats on the table because she had found a language she knew how to speak when the direct language wasn't available yet. "I've been timing my evenings around being home when you cook," I said. She blinked. "Since October," I said. "Not canceling things, just preferring to be here." And I told myself it was because the food was good. "It is good," she said, almost automatically. "It is," I said. "That's not why." She was very still. "Eli," she said. "Yeah. I didn't know how to just say it," she said. "I kept thinking, we live here, together, and if I say it and it goes wrong—" "I know," I said. "The apartment," she said. "We'd have to." "Margot," I said. "I know." "Okay," she said. "Okay," I said. We stood in the kitchen for a moment. The soup simmered. The apartment held the last hour of warmth from an afternoon that was already dark outside. "Do you want to sit down," she said, "and eat the soup?" "Yes," I said. "Okay," she said. She turned back to the stove and I got the bread from the counter and brought it to the table and sat down and we ate the soup, which was, as documented, very good. And we talked the way we had talked for 2 months of Tuesday evenings, except that something had changed in the air of it. Something that had been at a particular frequency without a name and now had a name, and I thought about ambient belonging and the space built right and the way a person could be not alone without performance, without announcement. Just soup at 8:15 and someone who was glad you were home. We did not rush. Partly because we were both, by nature, people who moved carefully. Partly because we lived together, which added a real and legitimate weight to the care. There was an apartment between us and a lease and the specific vulnerability of shared space that could not be undone easily if something went wrong. We treated this with seriousness rather than letting it be an excuse. What changed was simple and significant. The evenings that had been good became evenings that were acknowledged to be good. We ate dinner together and said so. We stayed at the table after the soup was gone and talked and said we were staying. The small reciprocities that had been building without declaration, the groceries, the dishes, the second portion, became conscious rather than ambient, and the becoming conscious of them didn't diminish them, it gave them their right size. She made dinner. I did the dishes, mostly, because she cooked and I didn't, and this seemed correct. On weekends, I sometimes attempted things I found from the cooking section of the newspaper, and she stood at the counter and watched with an expression she tried to make neutral and did not entirely succeed at, and corrected me when the correction mattered and let things go when they didn't, which I discovered was how she did most things. In January, I told her, while doing dishes on a Sunday night, that I had been thinking about ambient belonging since November. "Still?" she said. "It's a good concept," I said. "I've been applying it." "To urban planning?" "Among other things," I said. She looked at me sideways. "Among other things," she said. "A well-designed space," I said, "makes you feel tethered to the world without requiring you to perform connection." She was quiet for a moment. "That's us," she said. Simply. "That's us," I said. She handed me the last bowl to dry, and I dried it, and we stood in the kitchen on a January Sunday with the radiator doing its slow knock through the pipes and the city outside covered in the specific stillness of a snowfall that had started while we were inside and would still be going when we were done. She still cooks most nights. I do not take it for granted. I have told her this specifically. which she received with the particular expression she makes when something matters to her and she is deciding whether to say so. A brief look, sideways, the smallest adjustment at the corner of her mouth. She started leaving the 2 placemats on the table permanently. We did not discuss this. One day they were on the counter, the next they were on the table, and that was that. I told my coworker about her. Not the whole of it, just that I was seeing someone, that she was great, that she lived across the hall from me. My coworker said, "Across the hall? How long has she been there?" 14 months, I said. He looked at me with the expression of a man considering whether to say something. "Across the hall," he said again. "We're roommates," I said. "She's across from my bedroom." He put his coffee down. "Eli," he said. "I know," I said. What I know now, that I would tell the version of myself who was eating soup alone in October, before he knew what the soup meant. The design of a space matters, but it is not the whole thing. You can build the right conditions, the well-positioned bench, the shared table, the apartment with actual walls, and still miss what's in them if you are not paying the right kind of attention. She had been paying attention since October. She had found a language she could use when the direct language wasn't available. 2 portions, 2 placemats, the low specific warmth of an apartment that knew someone was coming home. I had been, by the data, paying attention too. I had just needed the 2 bowls on the table to see what I had been measuring. Last month we renewed the lease, both names, 1 unit. We put both placemats in a drawer, which seemed, given the context, like the right place for them now, still there, no longer required as signal, just placemats. But I know what they said, and I did not let myself forget it. Have you ever had someone say something to you in a language they invented because they hadn't found the words yet, and realized when you understood it that you'd been saying something back the same way? And have you ever found the right person in exactly the place you weren't looking? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one found you at the right time, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.